Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Chim Himidumage, as introduced. I just like to kind of introduce decentralized identities, one of the kind of a byproduct of blockchain. Let's start with this. Before getting into what decentralized identities, let's see what digital identities are and how digital identities has evolved over the time. So basically how it started with centralized identities. So you can think of a system where, if you think 10 years back, what happened, you would have a software system, you would create a user ID and a password, and that gives you access to that particular system, and basically that would represent yourself within that system. So that would give you what certain features to be accessed, and certain features you would not be able to access certain features. So all that would be based on this centralized identity. So it's very specific to that system, and that is basically isolated within that. So that was how it started. So then basically the internet started to catch up, and everyone started using internet, and it was not one or two systems that people log into, so there were so many systems. So with that, the concept of federated identity management or federated identities came into the picture. So the idea of federated identities, basically you create an account with a particular organization. Of course, then you get access to all the services provided by that organization. In addition to that, what you could get from what you could do is basically that the trust that you have built with that organization can be extend to a different system as well. So, for example, if you take Google or Facebook, basically you can create a Facebook identity, Facebook ID. So you have the account with that. You can, of course, interact with the Facebook. But at the same time, you could use the same identity to access Airbnb or Meetup.com. So those are completely different organizations, but these organizations as a federation trust each other to accept a user coming from who has been authenticated with one system or with the Facebook to accept to the Airbnb or the Meetup.com. So this basically share a lot of characteristics or the technology or techniques of single sign-on, but single sign-on and federated identity management or federated identities are slightly different. Single sign-on, in definition, single sign-on means there's an organization which provides series of services, multiple services. So once you log into a particular service, of course your login is valid for other services provided by the same organization. But federated means it go across organizations, beyond the limits of the organization, and allow you to still use the same login. But the techniques that used in single sign-on and federated identities are quite similar. So this was a good model, easy to use, user-friendly. But there were problems, you need to provide all of your information, identity plus any attributes that you want to tie up with your identity would be with a external organization. For instance, Facebook, they have your entire profile and your social network and many more information with them. So people are not really happy about this model. You need to give away your personal information to external organizations, and of course they have the control over those, and they have the control over your identity as well. So this was not people start to see problems with this, and then they move on to user-centric identities. So the best example for this is OpenID, where there are dedicated organizations who manage your identity. And you will have more ownership on the identity and the attributes that are attached with that identity. And of course, you can decide who should get that data. But still, you're creating your identity on an external organization. So that's better than the federated, because you have a better ownership and you have a slightly better control over the information, but still you do not own it holistically you don't own your identity. So the next step or the next improvement was the self-sovereign identity or the decentralized identity, which basically gives you the ownership, the control, and even the identity creation is something that you have the total control over. You do not rely on a external entity or external party or external organization to create your identity. So that seems to be the best that we can think of in terms of owning your own information and identity. So down here you can see a few examples like Sovereign and Uport, Yellowcom are some popular self-sovereign identity providers. But we'll be discussing few more. We'll be discussing few more identity providers as well down the line. So yeah, this is kind of evolution of the identity as you see, and let's kind of dive deep into decentralized identity. Yeah. So this again, like this is a history. Like basically earlier you have been giving all your information to different organizations, and they had the control over your identity and the information going with you. So now I kind of want to remind you what are the key characteristics of decentralized ledger or blockchain. Like I mean, there's no central authority. There's no one is really controlling it, and no intermediaries. You can directly interact with the blockchain. You don't have to go through anyone. No single point of failure. Like again, taking down a node doesn't make any difference. Still the system will be running, and tamper-proof as it says. And borderless transactions means it doesn't matter where you are. You could interact with anyone or interact with the system, irrespective to where you are. You cannot really, I mean, no one could really control you depending on your geographical location or anything. So, I mean, when you go through this, you might see that, like, this would be a better model of taking the control from an authorized authority, from authority to, yourself. Yeah, take it closer to you. That being said, so the fundamental difference between different identity services or identity providers that we discussed earlier and the self-sovereign identity or the decentralized identity is that even the identity provider is yourself, right? I mean, with all other models, like, you have this, like, improvement of, like, you can have the data in a single place too. You can have, you will be trusting an authority, and you can have your data in single place. Then you can control the certain attributes of your data. But throughout, the identity provider has been an external entity or an external organization. But with the self-sovereign identity, even the identity provider is yourself, means you have the full control of the identity with self-sovereign identity. So basically, you have the data. Other organizations would have to ask data from you if they need it. So you have to, I mean, you will have the control of giving that data away or not, depending on the organization or your requirement. Yeah, then basically self-sovereign identity, I mean, this concept is not very old, probably started in 2015. Initial papers were put out in 2015, and of course it's an ongoing process. People are still designing it. People are coming up with different ideas to see how this can be modeled and designed in a way that it's the best for everyone. So there's an ideology, like, how it should work, what it should be, and what to expect from that. And at the same time, there's an architecture. There are a few components which kind of try to support this ideology to achieve that, technically achieve that. So the ideology mainly, I mean, there are a few points that comes with the ideology. Like, if you really analyze an identity, basically, so any individual basically has multiple identities. That is, like, you might you would be shopping online, so your profile and what you'll be buying and all that would be one identity. Like, but if you really think about your health history or healthcare, the transaction pertaining to that is not necessarily have anything to do with your purchasing. So these two should not mix. if I go further, like, I mean, your social interactions, like, you would have your friends and you would have, like, different groups. So you would not need this to be revealed. I mean, who your friends are doesn't need to really reveal in your purchasing history or purchasing activities. So what it believes is individual would have multiple, he'll be dealing with multiple aspects. So each of these aspects should have a separate identity. So you can isolate unrelevant actions or activities to that particular aspect, like, can be isolated, right? So you should have a separate identity for each aspect or each aspect or each event to each transaction if required. So this is something that self-sovereign identity want to have for individuals once it is in place. Like, as I said, you should be able to generate it on the identity and control it. No one else should be able to do anything about your identity. So that's something, again, the SSID trying to achieve. And it further goes, like, the information that you have, like, what information I should share with someone, with whom I should share, with organization or an individual or a platform, with whom I should share this information, and even it goes to the level to say that, okay, for how long I should have this information shared with someone or some organization. Like, for instance, think about, like, you train with someone. So you go to a gym and train with someone. So maybe you will be training for 3 months, and it's important that person, your trainer, knows your weight, what your body weight is for the 3 months. So you should be able to set it up. Okay, for the next 3 months, I am revealing my body weight to this particular trainer, and after those 3 months, that information should not be available for him. So that's kind of the level that self-sovereign identity want to address the security or the privacy of information when people share that information with external parties. Having said that, as I said, this is a novel idea, and it's at the very initial stage. So even though the ideology really speak about this kind of extreme conditions or extreme or more sophisticated features, the real implementation is, like, definitely lag behind. I mean, it's at the very initial stage or infantry level. So yeah, just want to kind of flag that. Yes. Now, the architecture of self-sovereign identity basically depend on 3 major elements: the decentralized identity, what the format of it, what elements are there in the identity, and then a universal resolver. I'll be discussing that, and verifiable claims. So all these 3 aspects, let's kind of get into bit of detail on each of these aspects. Yeah, decentralized identity. I mean, current day the problem is none of the identities belongs to you. Those identities belongs to someone else, like NIC, driver's license, passport. Probably the government owns those identities on behalf of you. Then the Facebook, Google, of course, those companies own those identities. They can block you, they can cut you off from their services, or they can limit the services that they provide to you. So you don't have much of a control with the identity, even though it's your identity. So this is what we're trying to get rid of. We want to get that control back to us. Yeah. So in the DID or the self-sovereign identity, of course, there's no central registry. Keep all the records, and it can be add in or take off as someone wants to. No identity provider. As I said, you yourself would be the provider of the identity, and there's no certification or anything to control or give rank or grade your identity. And this decentralized identity has to be globally unique. But the special thing is, like, it will be a unique identity, but you can derive pseudo identities based on the requirement for different aspects of your interactions with different parties. And it should be available to all. Like, since there's no authority, anyone could go ahead and create an identity for him. So there's no barrier there. Anyone can create an identity. An identity and the related things should be cryptographically verifiable. This is something like if you claim this, say you say that you own a particular account, say GitHub account, and you should be able to cryptographically verify that you are the real owner of this particular repository or the account or something like that. That has to be always there. The privacy, of course, with the cryptography, the privacy is already provided to you when you use decentralized identities. So this is kind of the structure of a decentralized ID. The schema DID, I mean, it stays DID, it won't change. And then there's something called method and the unique address. So the method is like, DIDs can be issued by multiple organizations or multiple, I don't want to call the word authority, but different services could offer you different DIDs. And then there are some metadata around the DID. So what those metadata and how those metadata can be processed is kind of defined by the method. So it's basically allows external party to understand how the metadata of the identity can be processed. So that's the idea of this method. So this is kind of the structure of a DID. And there are, at the moment, there are so many DID providers, like I think about 50, 60 DID providers, and these are the different methods that they have used. You can see the Bitcoin and Ethereum, IPFS, Sovereign. So these are basically some DID providers and specific method names. The second aspect is the DID resolver. This part of the architecture, the DID resolver is when you have a DID, you should be able to provide the DID and ask for this additional metadata. So the additional metadata tells a bit more information about the DID, like what public key he is using and what kind of a cryptography algorithm he's using, and things like what endpoints that enable resolve further information about this DID. So there are few additional information, and of course how to create a DID, how to modify it, how to revoke it. All that information can be found in this in a document called DID document actually. So get hold of the DID document and passing it is kind of responsibility of the DID resolver. So if you are basically hosting, if you're issuing a DID, you should have a DID resolver which helps the external parties to come and get more information about the DID. Again, these can't be centralized. These should be open standards, and anyone should be able to host this service for any DID issuer. So it can't be anything proprietary down here. And of course, this DID document or the document never contain any personal data about the identity. The last aspect is verifiable claims. So if you really think about an identity, basically it get tied up with some claims or capabilities are basically tied up with the identity. For instance, if you take the driver's license, that's kind of an identity, but what it really carries is that it says that you are capable of driving this type of a vehicle. So that's a claim. The education, if you get a degree certificate, the same thing, it says you are qualified as with this particular degree course or whatever. It gives you a claim. So these claims, the self-sovereign identity wants to incorporate these claims with the identity, and then then they want such claims to be verifiable, cryptographically verify such claims. So few parties involved, when this kind of a thing happens, there's an issuer who really issued the certificate, so he might sign something with his private key, and that will be again signed by the subject or the person who's really holding this qualification or the capability, and that could be part of his self-sovereign identity. So with the permission of the owner, someone else, a third party, could come and make sure that, okay, this particular organization has really offered this particular capability to this particular user. So all this could happen without anyone involving. The person need to verify that, could look into the DID, but you need the permission from the user, provided that he can verify it, cryptographically verified that, okay, this person is really carrying this particular qualification or the capability with him. Yeah, so that kind of brings the technical aspect of it. So there's an organization called DID Foundation, which basically spearhead this entire movement. There are about 50 or more organizations involved with this. I mean, most of these organizations either they provide DID, decentralized identities, or they have infrastructure to issue decentralized identities, or they use decentralized IDs for different purposes to to provide different services. Yep. Yeah. So even though we are not exposed much, I think out there a lot of things happening with this this aspect. And here you have some references, and I should extend my thanks to Snorra Edwin, CTO of Diwala, who kind of who has has helped me and provided some materials to me to put this presentation together. And you have a very interesting set of articles. The first article, the Medium article, I mean, it's from one of the engineers in Newport. It describes in a very simple manner what the decentralized identity, what the self-sovereign identity, and so on. And some specifications. Most of these specifications are they change quite frequently since the technology is really new. Yep, I think that's pretty much from me. So I think we have some. We'll be diving further into decentralized identity. Probably a use case or an implementation of decentralized identity would be discussed next in the next presentation. Yeah, questions, of course, there'll be a panel discussion, so if you have any questions, we can definitely take them up in the panel discussion and during the networking event. Thank you very much.